Hey, welcome. Happy Marvelous Monday. I'm so excited that you are joining me live today. For those of you who are tuned in for the very first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm super excited to have you join me today. Listen, um, this is what I do each and every Monday. I'm Karissa Spann, and today we are going to hit this topic a little hard today, but for those of you who are tuned in for the very first time, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Karissa Spann, your favorite landlord and tenant expert, and I'm here to keep it real and to keep you informed. So one of the things that I do want to let you know is that this is what we do each and every Monday. We're live 7:30 p.m. We come together to bridge the gap between landlords and tenants. I mean, really, it's a conversation that is so important in the rental community. It's no fluff, it's no sugarcoating, it's just real talk, real solutions, and just a little bit of humor along the way. So today's topic, let me just tell you, this is a good one. We're talking about red flags, what to look out for in rental property. So as a landlord, have you ever rented to someone who turned your peaceful investment into a full-blown nightmare? Or perhaps you're a tenant and perhaps you're tired of being unfairly grouped in with bad renters. Listen, this segment is for you. So grab your notepad, tag another landlord or a tenant in the comments section, and let's get right into it. All right, so I'm going to pull up some information. I do have tips for landlords. I have tips for tenants. And then towards the end, I have a segment that I throw in, which is titled Truth or Trash. All right, so I want to get straight into it. So as a landlord, let's be honest. Most of us, we have learned the hard way that it's not always about the first month's rent, right? That's not the thing that really hurts the most. What hurt is the 6 months eviction notice. So today's segment is all about spotting those red flags before it's too late. I do want to say that if you have a comment, a question, remark, or an observation, throw it in the comment section. I see that I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on LinkedIn, and I'm also live on YouTube. So thank you so much. All right, I want to get straight into it because I have quite a bit to share in a short amount of time. And for those of you who are watching the replay, drop replay in the comment section. I want to acknowledge you. And so today we are talking about the red flags, what to look out for in rental property. All right, so let me pull up my first tip. I'm going to start with landlords first. I recognize that I have quite a few landlords who tune in each and every week, and I want to start with you first, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to share information for tenants. All right, so as a landlord, let me pull that slide up for you here, because I want you to see it. And sometimes the best way to see it is to bring it up on screen. Let me see. I think I do want to start with landlords first, because I think that in many cases for landlords, some of your biggest concerns are along those frequently asked questions in terms of conversations that I've had with you all, emails, training that I've done. These are the top concerns that many of you have had. So when it comes to your rental property, I want you to always consider that the number one issue based off of the feedback that I've gathered from you is that tenants who frequently move or they have no rental history is a big red flag. So for instance, if someone has been hopping from place to place every few months, that's a pattern. That's not a coincidence. Please consider that a red flag. So when you are conducting your background check, and you should, and even if, let's say for instance, you don't really factor in the background check, you don't factor in the credit, especially for those of you who rent to participants in the housing program, I would still recommend conducting a background check, because if you are including, let's say, rental history, right? You do a check on their rental history, or perhaps you reach out to the current and the prior landlords, and you recognize that there's a pattern where the tenant is hopping around from one place to the next, from one place to the next. That is a red flag that I hope that you are not overlooking or missing. And if you're not conducting these background checks, you don't even know that this is their pattern. There's no way for you to understand the behavior if you skip that part of the process. So still do the application, right? Still do the background check, because that's where some of that behavior will show up on the front end. Here's a second thing. When it comes to evictions, sometimes some of my colleagues, they will overlook it, they will skip it. But let me just tell you this. Check that eviction history. Don't just glance at it, because as a landlord, when you are screening your applicants, when you're screening your prospective tenants, you never want to skip that eviction check. And don't just stop at whether or not one shows up or not. Dig a little bit deeper. Sometimes, just depending on the software that you're using, an eviction from a different state may not show up. So just because you see or you don't see something, I would still recommend to go a little bit deeper and then ask those questions. So one of the things that I will do is this. When I'm conducting background checks and I see evictions, right, on a prospective tenant record, we'll have a conversation to find out what happened so that I can understand what's going on. Here's what I do know. There are quite a few tenants who perhaps have been evicted, not because of any fault of their own. In some cases, you have stolen identity, mistaken identity, or I've had tenants who co-sign or put a lease in their name for someone else. And as a result of whoever they were trying to help out, that person ended up being evicted, which destroyed or damaged that person, the tenant's name that's trying to rent from you. And so when you have those conversations, you can really get a greater understanding to know what's really happening, what's really going on. So here's a third thing. For you as a landlord, you never, ever want to overlook that late or missing payment, because it tells a story. So please make sure that you pay attention to that. Listen, landlords, one of the biggest red flags you just simply cannot afford to ignore is a pattern of late or missing payments. Can we agree that a single late payment might not mean much because life happens? But when you see a pattern, that's a preview of what's coming your way. So don't overlook the pattern. Don't overlook that consistent behavior, because it does paint a big red flag. All right. Hey, Kim, thank you so much for tuning in. I see your comment. All right. So now let me share some information for tenants, because I promised that I would. So as a tenant, here's what I do want you to know and understand about when you're trying to rent, right? You're completing the application. As a matter of fact, let me take it back a little bit further. Before you complete an application, know that landlords are looking for the perfect tenant. I don't really know that a perfect tenant exists, but they are still looking for the best possible fit. So the first thing that you want to do as a tenant is to show stability. So whether it's employment, community involvement, whatever it is you do, you just want to show that you are stable, because landlords, they are looking for consistency. Okay. They are looking for reliable patterns. They're looking for you to, second tip here, to be upfront and transparent. Why? Because honesty builds trust. And That's the fastest way to get approved. So let's say, for instance, you have a less than desirable rental history. I would much rather have someone who is completely honest about what they have gone through to explain what happened and why. I can work with that. So that's why I always recommend to just be upfront, be honest. If you know that perhaps you've had a bad run with your previous landlords, or maybe you have bad credit, right? When they dig deeper, they're going to find that information. Usually landlords who conduct a serious or an extensive background check, they'll typically find that information. So go ahead and be honest, be upfront. Sometimes it's helpful to write a letter to explain what happened, to explain the breaks, any gaps in the income, employment, rental history, right? Just go ahead and explain it. And here's your third thing as a tenant. References do matter. Listen, they speak when you're not in the room. So if you're a tenant, your references can make or break your rental application. A strong reference tells a landlord that, hey, you can trust me as a tenant. I pay my rent on time. I take care of where I live. Now, I will say this because I've had crafty tenants. I think that's a good way to put it. I've had crafty tenants, prospective tenants, who during the application process, they provided, I really want to laugh because they were really creative, but they provided references of alleged references, but they provided contact information to their friends. So perhaps their best friend or someone that they know, right? It wasn't really their landlord, but they provided information and they said, hey, Karissa, this is my landlord. This is my landlord's telephone number. Call them for a reference check to confirm that I am a good tenant. So me being me, of course, I'm going to reach out to the references. And because this is what I teach, I'm a property management educator. I've been in the game for over 20 years. I know what questions to ask. I will always ask the right question. And a real landlord will only a real landlord will know how to answer those questions. And so I had quite a few prospective tenants gave me their friends' information. I called them. The friends were not able to answer the questions. So I ended up calling the prospective tenant back. I said, hey, listen, I reached out to your landlord regarding your reference check, only for someone to answer. They were not able to provide the information. And then I asked a question, was that a friend or someone? Because they didn't have any information and they couldn't answer the questions that I was asking. So this young lady, she says, oh, I apologize. Here's my landlord's number. So the second person, she gave me a telephone number. I won't say it was a bogus number, but it was not for the property management office. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues owns the company. So I knew the company name, I knew the company address, I knew the company number because I've been working with them for an extended amount of time. So when this young lady gave me another one-off number, I just knew that this was someone that could not be trusted, right? So if you are asked to provide a reference as a tenant, don't give them your friend's number, because you can come across someone such as myself who's willing to take a chance on you, but because of a lie, that is the easiest way to get your application totally denied. So don't wait until you're applying to start thinking about them. You want to stay in good standing with your current landlord. You want to make sure that you keep records of your on-time payments. You want to keep records of good communication. Why is that important? Because nowadays you may have landlords who will do a a pre-application questionnaire. And if you're new to renting, you definitely want to use professional references. So maybe this is your first time renting, right? You've never rented a property before, but you can use a reference like perhaps a supervisor, a teacher, maybe a mentor who can vouch for your character to indicate that you are responsible. All of these things do matter. And I want you to take into consideration that many landlords will go above and beyond to conduct these background checks. As a matter of fact, let me pause here. Let me put a dime in the meter. Let me go back to landlords. If you are conducting references, if you are conducting background checks, one of the things that you can absolutely do is not only contact that current landlord, but also contact the previous landlord. Here's why that's important. This is not going to be a surprise to many of you because you've heard me share before. And yes, I have done this, and I have colleagues who have done the same. I have had tenants who were, and this is not tenant bashing, I'm just all about keeping it real, right? I have had tenants who were professional tenants. Some like to call them tenants from hell. So what I've done is I have given a bad tenant a good reference when their potential new landlord contact me. And I gave them a good reference to say, yes, they were a good tenant. And they may have asked, well, Karissa, would you rent to them again? And because it was easier for me to pass them on to someone else, I said, yes, I would absolutely rent to them again. And so this is why I'm saying don't solely rely on that current landlord. Check the reference of that landlord and the prior landlord, because that will give you a greater picture. It will tell a bigger story, if you will, about the true character of that tenant, if they paid their rent on time, if they were a good tenant, and if that landlord will rent to them again. So don't just take the first, yes, I would rent to them again as gospel, because that could flat out be a lie 100%. And as you've heard from me, straight from my mouth, I've done that before. And I know a lot of people do it. Sometimes it's cheaper to stretch the truth so that that tenant can move on to someone else's property versus having to go to court. So that's just a little bit in a nutshell of the red flags to look out for. I do want to pull up a truth or trash statement. And today it's all about red flags to look out for. So here's a truth or trash. Let me pull it up. A truth or trash statement here. Let me see if I can get it on the screen here. Give me 1 second. Sometimes technology is not always our friend. All right, so truth or trash statement here. Let me see which one I want to pull up first. I am going to go here. All right, so here is our first truth or trash. So here's how truth or trash works. So I'm going to read a statement, going to ask a question perhaps, and in the comment section, let me know if you agree with the statement or the question. Put truth in the comment section. If you don't agree with it, then put trash in the comment section, meaning that you just don't agree with the statement or the question. All right, so again, we're talking about those red flags, what to look out for, how to spot it. So here is our first truth or trash for today. All right, so here's the first one. You can spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress. Let me repeat it. I'm not sure what's going on with technology. I'm not able to pull it up on the screen. So let me just read it again. This is truth or trash. If you agree, type truth in the comment section. If you disagree, type trash. You can spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress. Do you agree with that statement? Is that true? That you can always spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress? Or is that trash? Type it in the comment section for me. All right, I see you on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much. I see your comment coming in. I'll wait for a few more. Let me repeat, and this is truth or trash. If you agree, type truth. If you disagree, type trash. You can spot a bad tenant by how they look or how they dress. All right, so I see your comments coming in. You said true. All right, another comment is false. All right, so I see 3 false comments. So someone said that that's a true statement, that you can spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress. And a few of you said that's trash. That's false. Okay, so here's the truth. That's trash. That's a trash statement. That is not always true. And I'm glad that we acknowledge that one first, and here's why. There are a lot of fair housing lawsuits that are in the pipeline, meaning that landlords have violated fair housing laws. And check this, some have violated for this specific reason. They looked at a tenant, they looked at how they dressed, they looked at their appearance, and they were in a position where they could have made a decision to rent to a tenant, and they flat out denied the application, did not rent to tenants. Please don't make that mistake. You could get yourself in a lot of trouble and get a lawsuit slapped against you for making that mistake. Never judge a person by how they look. There are testers out here. And here is what a tester is. A tester, and this is their job title. This is what they get paid to do. They are paid to test landlords. So testers will show up in twos. So you may have someone who is dressed, well polished, looking to rent your rental property. They're going to look for a specific unit. They're going to say something very specific. And then the second person is going to come along, maybe dressed a little different, not looking the same, maybe hair untamed, clothes a little rough or raggedy, right? Maybe rough around the edges. They're looking for the same identical place. They're going to ask the same questions. They're looking for the same type of unit. The conversation is going to be identical so that there is no variation in what they're asking for. And you must make sure that you are treating everybody the same way. So if they look rough, and I've had a colleague, I'm going to pause here. I have had a colleague who, now this was many years ago, and they did give me permission to share, and I've shared this in the past. They had given me permission to share this, and they thought that they were doing the right thing. They said, Karissa, we rent to African Americans because they were accused of not renting to Black males. And so they said, well, we don't have a problem renting to African American males. We do have a problem renting to the dark ones who have the dreadlocks in their hair. Well, that's still discrimination. That's discrimination based off of color. Yes, it was good that they rent to African American males because that's what they're supposed to do, especially in a jurisdiction that is pro-tenant and fair housing laws are strongly in play. And I had to let them know, never, ever say that again. And I understood what they meant, right? Maybe they were threatened by the appearance of the darker complexion African-American males who had dreadlocks and wore their pants sagging. Listen, at the end of the day, treat everybody the same. Don't focus on how a person looks. Don't look at their clothes, right? And make a decision based off of that because it could definitely come back to haunt you. All right, so here is another truth or trash. So again, if you agree with the statement, type truth in the comment section. If you disagree, type trash. Here's our second one for tonight. A tenant with no rental history is automatically a bad choice. Let me repeat it. A tenant with no rental history at all is automatically a bad choice. Do you agree with that statement? Do you believe that there's truth in that? Or do you believe it's trash? Let me know. Let me know in the comment section. Okay, I see your comment. I'm going to repeat it. A tenant with no rental history, meaning that they've never rented before. So the landlord completed the background check, or the property manager, if you will, completed the background check and found absolutely nothing. There's nothing is nothing there. They can't see where this tenant has ever lived. And so the question here is, when that happens, is that automatically a bad choice? Let me see in the comment section. Let me see what you say. All right, I see your comment coming in from YouTube. Facebook, where are you? Okay, I see you. I see your comment. I see your comment. All right, I'll wait for one other. Do you agree with that statement that no rental history is automatically a bad choice? All right, I see your comments. Your comments are false. That's trash. Good answer. Because some tenants, you have some tenants who may be in a situation where they're moving for the first time. They've never rented on their own, or perhaps they own property, right? They own their own place before something happened in life. Maybe they were downsized. Maybe they were caught up with what's happening coming down from the White House. They lost their job. They're out of income, right? They can't afford to pay their mortgages. So now they have to turn to renting. And because they've never rented before, it's not going to show up on that background check. So that is a trash statement. Someone who doesn't have a rental history at all is not automatically a bad choice. I would strongly recommend, however, to ask questions to understand, hey, listen, we completed the background check. We don't see a rental history. Can you explain where you live for the past 5 years? You want to verify it. Sometimes you have tenants who may have always lived with someone else. Maybe they've lived with a relative, right? And they haven't rented on their own. But it doesn't mean that they're automatically a bad choice. It just means that they don't have a rental history. So you all answered that correctly. Here is our third and final truth or trash statement for today. So I'm going to repeat it a few times because I'm not pulling the slide up on the screen. Here it is. If an applicant complains too much during the showing, there'll probably be a problem tenant. If an applicant complains too much during the showing, there'll probably be a problem tenant. Do you agree? Is that a truth or is that a trash? If an applicant complains too much during the showing, meaning that they're coming out to take a look at that rental property and they're complaining. All they're doing is complaining. They're talking about their landlord. They're talking about everything that went wrong. They're talking about their neighbors. They're talking about how everything just doesn't work well. Everything is always a problem. Everything is always an issue from their perspective. And it's just complain. If an applicant complains too much during the showing or the tour, there'll probably be a problem tenant. Let me see your comments. Do you agree with that statement, or do you think that is a trash statement? All right, so I see your comment. I'll wait for a couple of others. Thank you so much for tuning in, Lisa. What's your comment, Lisa? I'll wait for your comment. What's your response to this truth or trash? If an applicant complains too much during the showing or the tour, there'll probably be a problem tenant. Do you agree with that statement? If so, Lisa, type true. If not, if you disagree, type trash. I thought this was interesting. Okay, I see your comment. Thank you so much. This is a truth statement. Now, I know some of you might disagree, but here's the thing. We're talking about red flags, right? So we're talking about what to look out for. Red flags that are often found in the rental community. If you have a prospective tenant who's touring, they're looking at the rental property to see if this is going to be a good fit for them, if it's a good fit for you. If they are complaining out the gate, they're just complaining, oh, my landlord didn't do anything. My landlord was the absolute worst. Now here, let me just say this. There may be some truth in it because there are some slum landlords. So tenants, I'm on your side. We're here, okay? We're here, right? I do know that slum landlords exist. I absolutely hate slum landlords. Let me just say that. I do not support it. I don't condone the behavior at all. So let me get that in the way, right? But if you are someone who is complaining and all you have to say is something negative, that is considered a red flag. At the end of the day, we are looking for, when I say we, housing providers, property managers, property owners, investors. We are looking for tenants who are going to be a good fit. And if you come to us complaining about, oh, my landlord was some scum, my landlord was some sugar honey iced tea, they didn't do anything, child, that landlord, he has some issues going on, he was sleeping with tenants in the building, right? Like, if you're that person that's spilling the tea, if you're that person that's messy, we're going to consider that a red flag, because chances are when you get into our rental property, you likely are going to do the same thing. And so you are considered a problem tenant. That's a red flag. Now, it's not to say that everybody who complained is a problem tenant, but that is a red flag. And again, there are some truths in what tenants are saying. But when you have someone in that caliber, they have nothing positive to say at all, consider that a red flag. So I've shared quite a bit today, and I just want to do a quick recap. And thank you so much for tuning in. I gave tips for you as landlords, what to look for. I talked about how to spot those flags early. The first thing that I talked about was checking that eviction history, right? Don't just glance at it. Do a deep dive and don't ignore what you see. I talked about how you should always consider the first tip. I'm sorry, let me go back. The first tip that I shared was frequent moves. If you have a tenant who moves frequently, they hop around from one place to the next within a short period of time, consider that pattern and behavior to be consistent, right? That's the first red flag, right? That's a tip for you. The second tip was the eviction. Don't ignore what you see. Don't just glance at it, but definitely do a deep dive. Have a conversation to understand why the tenant was evicted, right? Because some evictions are not always the fault of that tenant, right? I talked about how late or missing payments tell a story, and to pay attention to that, because when you have a tenant, a prospective tenant who on the front end, you do the background check and you see that they have a habit of paying their rent late, understand what's happening, understand what's going on. But let me also say this. I have a tenant who has, this tenant has been in my property for approximately 24 months. And out of 24 months, they have, in fact, paid their rent late. 18 out of 24 months. Now, is that a bad tenant? No. There are some exceptions to the rule, but let me explain, because I know some of you like, well, Karissa, that just kind of like contradicted what you said. This tenant has a pay schedule that is off, right? So they get paid twice a month. And their income doesn't come in on time for them to make the rent payment on time. So what this tenant does, although they have paid their rent 18 out of 24 months late, they always pay the late fee. They always say, hey, Karissa, I'm going to get you the rent by the 7th, the 10th of the month or whatever, right? But they always pay it. They always pay the late fee. Now, if you have someone who pays it late, they don't have an explanation, they don't pay the late fee, yeah, have a conversation to find out why they're paying it that rent late. All right, so for tenants, I shared some tips for you. I shared how important it is to show stability. And again, it doesn't matter if it's employment or your community involvement with things that you're doing. Landlords, property managers, we are looking for consistency. We are looking for reliable patterns. So please make sure that you are able to do that. And if not, be able to explain it. So the second tip for you as a tenant I shared on today was to be upfront, be honest, be transparent, because honesty builds trust. You can have a property manager or a landlord such as myself, whereas we're willing to take a chance because you're honest and you let us know what the story is, right? And that's the fastest way to get approved. The third tip that I shared for tenants on today was this: references matter, right? And when you are talking to landlords, only give true information. Don't give a prospective landlord one of your girlfriends or your best friend information and tell them to pretend like they're your landlord. That will get your application denied. All right. So your references, like I said, can definitely make or break your rental application. And a strong rental reference tells a landlord that you can be trusted. It tells a landlord that you're going to pay your rent on time and that you're going to take care of the place that you live as if it is your own, right? So those are just the top 3 tips for landlords that I shared tonight, as well as the top 3 tips for tenants. But here's the thing, and here's the bottom line. Landlords, you don't have to learn the hard way because let's just face it, red flags are real and it just doesn't make sense to ignore them. You could ignore them, but then they could cost you time, it could cost you money, and worse, it could cost you peace of mind, meaning that you're going to just be stressed out. That's something that you can avoid if you just pay attention to the red flags. And so tenants, don't let bad tenants stereotype define who you are. Don't get caught up with the stigma. Don't get caught up with the myth. And for those of you who are tenants and you're participating in some sort of housing program, I know that sometimes being in a housing program can have a bad name, right? And there are so many negative things around housing programs, right? But don't get caught up in that. So just kind of listen to the tips that I've shared today, right? Show up prepared, communicate, and let your integrity do the talking. So I hope this was helpful today. For those of you who are tuned in on my Facebook channel, for those of you who are tuned in on LinkedIn, if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please find me on YouTube. There you can find me at Landlord Life. On my YouTube channel, you can go back and you can watch the replay. Okay, I see your comment. I'm coming to you in 1 second. Thank you so much. But on my YouTube channel, you can find prior topics over the prior weeks. And again, this is what I do each and every Monday. I'm live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you miss anything, if you join me late, you can always go back to the YouTube channel, watch the replay. And if tonight's episode has definitely helped you, please make sure that you grab my ebook. The description in the comment section is the link to grab that ebook titled 100 AI Prompts for Landlords. And I promise it will be of value for those of you who are new in the space. If you're self-managing your rental properties and you want to learn how to use AI technology, there are 100 prompts that you can just copy and paste, and it will make your rental business a lot easier. It will make your life a lot easier. I had the privilege of facilitating a couple of weeks ago AI for Landlords workshop, and it was absolutely phenomenal. Listen, let AI be your friend. Don't be afraid to use the tools. Get that ebook, grab that ebook. It is full of tools that will help you screen your tenants better, manage smarter, and protect your rental business. And of course, like I said, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please follow, please share, and join me next week for another episode of Landlord and Tenant Talk Uncensored, live with me, Karissa Spann, your favorite landlord and tenant expert, where I keep it real, I keep it transparent, because I believe in educating, empowering, and encouraging you all in the rental community. So this is not just something to do. It's not just entertaining, but it's also to empower you and to educate you. All right, so now let me come to your comment. All right, so your question is if I could go back to the first truth or trash. Absolutely, you missed the first one. Okay, so my first truth or trash that I shared tonight was you can spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress. So truth or trash is if you agree, type true. If you disagree, type trash. You can spot a bad tenant by how they look or dress. That is trash. So thank you for asking me to repeat that one. You definitely don't want to stereotype anybody because of how they look, because of how they dress, even by how they smell, because you can have someone, let's say you have someone who maybe had an emergency or just had a bad rough week, right? And maybe they just didn't look their best. Don't automatically deny them because of how they look, because of how they dress, because of how they smell, right? That could be perceived as fair housing discrimination. Fair housing laws are in place to protect tenants, so you don't want to violate their rights. And so thank you for asking for me to repeat that. All right, so that is it. That's all I wanted to share for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. My time is up, and I absolutely thank you for yours. Please make sure that you stay tuned in, you stay informed, you stay empowered. And listen, at the end of the day, keep your rental game going strong, whether you are a landlord or a tenant. All right. And if you have questions, if you're on the YouTube channel, ask me your questions, drop your comment. I will definitely respond on the YouTube channel. For those of you who are watching the replay, go ahead and drop replay in the comment section so that I can acknowledge you. And that's it. That's the show for today. We talked about red flags to look out for in the rental community. And I look forward to seeing you all next week right here. I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on LinkedIn, and I'm live on YouTube. It's been a fantastic pleasure having you today. Have an amazing week, guys. I will see you all next week. Same time, same channel with me, Karissa. See you then.